Welcome to the 128th season of the Canadian Club Toronto, Canada's Podium. For over a century, this platform has been a gathering place for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to discuss the most pressing issues of our time.
We've been having important discussions and debates around this podium in this country for well over a century. I call this a historic podium of record.
Our club's always been a forum for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to command attention to the issues of our time.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests, members, and friends of the Canadian Club Toronto in person and online. Welcome to our first event of 2025. My name is Tanya Van Biesen. As President of Canadian Club Toronto, it is my honor to kick off this new year with the 48th annual Outlook event, an enduring tradition that has become one of Canada's most popular political and economic forecast gatherings. For 48 seasons, we've proudly co-hosted this signature event with the Financial Post, and we are thrilled to partner with them again this year. Now, today's panel will take us beyond the headlines, delivering expert insights on the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead in 2025. If the first half of this week is a bellwether, I'm sure this is going to be an engaging and thought-provoking discussion, and I hope a bit spicy. Today, we are very grateful to Scotiabank and EY for their generous and continued support of our annual Outlook event. Thank you to both of you. I would also like to acknowledge our season sponsor, Canadian Bankers Association, for its generous support, and Air Canada as the club's official airline. Thank you for your sponsorship. And we are proud to share that Canada's Forest Trust Corporation is our smart forest planting partner for the third season in a row. Through this partnership, we've planted and protected 1,250 trees to date. I'd also like to welcome the students from Toronto Metropolitan University. We are so glad that you are here joining us for this discussion. Now, before I introduce our panelists, let me share a bit of club business with you. I will invite you to visit our website at canadianclub.org, where you will find event and membership information, as well as a great on-demand event feature for anything that you've missed in the past. I also encourage you to share information and your reactions about today's event on your favorite social media channel. Social media handles can be found on your tables. Now, I'm sure you're going to have questions for our panelists, given everything that's going on right now in Canada and around the world. So please take the time to fill out the Q&A cards on your table. Our volunteers will be collecting them and bringing them up to Barbara to give to our panelists or to share with our panelists. And for those joining remotely, please hit the red Q&A button on the right side of your screen to submit a question. Now, allow me to introduce our exceptional panelists for today. J.F. Perreault, Senior Vice President and Chief Economist, Scotiabank. For the past decade, JF has guided Scotiabank's domestic and international policy strategies with his deep understanding of economic policy, informed by roles at the Bank of Canada, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. Tasha Keridan, national political columnist, National Post. One of Canada's leading political analysts, Tasha offers clear and incisive commentary across many platforms, making sense of the forces shaping our nation's political landscape, which will be a particular challenge, I would think, today. Amanda Lang, host of Taking Stock, Bell Media. Amanda has over 25 years of award-winning journalism experience in North American business and economics. Her knowledge and experience is now showcased in her widely acclaimed weekly television program, and we look forward to hearing from you. Dennis Mitchell, Chief Executive Officer and Chief Investment Officer, Starlight Capital. With over 20 years of investment experience, Dennis is a celebrated investment leader and innovator who's been recognized on numerous occasions for his strong market calls. So no pressure, Dennis, on what you're going to say today. Our conversation will be guided expertly by Barbara Schechter, a seasoned journalist who has spent more than 2 decades interviewing CEOs, policymakers, and decision makers from across Canada's business community. Together, this esteemed group promises to deliver insights and ideas that will help us navigate the road ahead in 2025 with clarity and confidence. And now it is my great pleasure to turn Canada's podium to our moderator, Barbara Schechter.
Thanks so much. Wow, what a week this is to host this, and it's only Tuesday. Fair enough. Wednesday. Wednesday. Okay, I'm not going to be guided anymore by our resident economist. No, I will indeed be interested to hear your insights. I've already heard some of them, and there is a lot to talk about. So we're going to try to get through it. Politics, as has been raised, is probably an even bigger contributor to our discussion today than in past years, although there are a lot of intersections always with economics and business. But I want to start with Canada because this is, I don't know, I'm not going to use the word everyone's thinking of, starts with a U, but it does seem very unprecedented, and I want to open it up that way. We have Parliament prorogued, we have the Prime Minister on his way out, a leadership race that may see some cabinet ministers leave their posts in order to chase that role. And I want to know, how badly could Canada be hurt by all of this? I throw it open.
You're staring at me, Barbara.
I am
So
staring at you, only
try.
because of the politics. Tasha,
that's
Tasha,
fine.
why don't you start us off?
I think it is a very perilous moment for Canada because of the confluence of circumstances you've described, coupled with what's happening south of the border. It is no secret that Donald Trump has said, I think 5 times now, that he would like us to be the 51st state. So faced with that, it's very difficult for a government that is not sitting, where half the cabinet, like you said, may well be in a leadership race, so you don't even have that at the table, to respond in a unified way. That said, the government can still do certain things. It can, for example, if it wanted to, impose tariffs. It did that in 2018. It can do that without the House of Commons say so. The Prime Minister can do that. There's limited ability to do money bills that you can do them by warrant if they had to through the Governor General, again, by the Prime Minister asking. So there is some maneuverability, but the big question really is, what will this do federally when all the provinces have different interests in responding to what the U.S. threat represents? And that's where things can go off the rails. The Team Canada approach, I fear, will not happen because Alberta will have its interests, Ontario, Quebec, Atlantic Canada, and their leaders will try and advance those. And Daniel Smith was already in Washington this week, meeting with leaders there. It's a natural thing to do to protect your interests, but it doesn't help us as a nation present a unified front. So that's my concern.
I hadn't had this thought until just now, but I'll share it anyway, which is maybe actually it's a blessing in disguise that Parliament's prorogued, because there is such a thing as overreaction to an incendiary Donald Trump and his first weeks or even couple months in office. And I don't know about sort of how political history will remember it, but I think the initial reaction to the threat of tariffs was overdone and didn't look good on us. And I think to Tasha's point, a lot of the work does get done at state to governor level, at business to business level. And that it's not that there isn't an important all of Canada response and a national response, but maybe if we could just cool it a little bit and not react to every twitch or tweet, we might be better served.
You look like you're reacting and have something to
I
say.
just had the thought,
Well,
so bear with me.
no, I'm not laughing at your thought. I'm just laughing at the not responding to everything he does, because that's going to be a challenge for the next 4 years. He's going to say things that are designed to engage, that are designed to discombobulate, that are designed to get some kind of probably to get some kind of advantage. And I kind of agree with you, like, you know, not having a parliament sitting, I think maybe allows the government to be a bit more focused to some extent. So for instance, you know, LeBlanc, I think, tweeted out today or said something today to the effect that they're meeting at 6 p.m. to talk about retaliating against possible tariffs in the U.S. So, you know, the government is likely to put forward a list of things that they would do if Trump retaliates or Trump
goes through.
uses economic force. You know, would that happen with Parliament sitting? Probably, but maybe it allows a little bit more focus. At the end of the day, you know, we knew this was coming at some point or other. It was clear that Trudeau was going to go, or it was clear we would have a new prime minister at some point this year, whether it was Trudeau or well, not Trudeau, some other liberal versus a conservative. You know, as much as I find it awkward politically from an engagement perspective, I'm a little bit more optimistic by the fact that this sounds horrible, but by the fact that he's gone. Because it does mean that we have a clear path to a new government. It means that, you know, Trump can declare some kind of victory, as he already has. He's taken down one prime minister already. And you know, maybe look forward to a world where there will be a more constructive relationship between the next government, which we now know will occur, you know, next summer or something, versus, you know, having Liberals in power till October or maybe later next year. So I'm a little bit
Team glass
more
half
positive.
full over here.
Yeah.
I guess I'd like, Dennis, you to jump in, but I would sort of frame it maybe in the sense of, you know, this is a forecast luncheon, and we're talking about maybe not having an election until May, and although you're talking about, you know, Trudeau is moving out, like, who is going to be in, and we're going to be midway through the year, what are businesses thinking, and what should they be doing with all this uncertainty? Do you want to?
Yeah, good question. So you have a whole bunch of legislation that was set to be tabled and read and passed into law that is not. So I know, you know, my CFO and business partner is losing his mind right now because he's trying to figure out what we should do with special distributions and tax slips and so forth because of the proposed increase in the inclusion rate of the capital gains tax, right? So just things like that. There's a ton of uncertainty, and so I come back to. And I'm actually going to steal John Ruffalo's pitch yesterday that he delivered on BNN. We as a nation and businesses need to be focused on innovating more. And this comes from the article that you shared earlier this week. We just need to do more stuff within Canada. It doesn't matter who the prime minister is. It doesn't matter what challenges we face from the US. There will always be challenges. There will always be uncertainty. We just need to do more here with what we have. We need to create more wealth here. We need to allow people to keep more of it, and that will drive spending. That will encourage greater investment, and that will lead to greater prosperity. Like, that's what we need to do. So yes, there's there's a ton of uncertainty, but I mean, find me a day in the calendar where everything will be squared away and we know what's going to happen, and then we can all make decisions on that day. Sure, we don't have a functioning prime minister. We have an election coming up, absolutely. Maybe a bit of a blessing in disguise in that Trump certainly doesn't like Trudeau, right? What was it that his traded what Navarro said? There's a special place in hell for Trudeau. So that's probably a bit of a blessing in disguise that he's exiting stage left. I think it's actually a positive for us that Poilievre looks like Speaker of the House Johnson, right? The two of those guys could be brothers.
Well, you mentioned earlier that Trump likes people, or, you know.
Well, yeah, he had a crush on Macron. So. At first, him and Trudeau were buddies. Like, he likes attractive people. And, you know, he's buddies with Mike Johnson. If Poilievre is the next Prime Minister of Canada, that might actually bode well for us.
I don't know. I want to be optimistic. I do. Trump's already quipped that Poilievre could win. He might not win. I don't care what he says. Okay. I think it's less simply the individual. I think his disrespect for Trudeau was personal. But I think there's also just a general disrespect for any head of state of Canada. And I think that is an unfortunate situation because we have been an excellent partner, both economically and militarily too, which Trump did not mention in 2 world wars and other places as well. So what I'm concerned about from a media perspective too is the disinformation piece, which Business does not really address, it's not your business to do that, but it is very important to be aware of, because the way Trump is framing this argument about Canada is from a fairness perspective. He is saying that America pays $200 billion a year to keep Canada afloat, essentially. And we know that's false. I mean, the actual trade deficit is only $41 billion, and it's not a subsidy. So this disinformation, though, is framed as a fairness piece for the average American who can't pay their bills. And they're looking at this and saying, well, why should I pay all that money to Canada? We have to counter that narrative, because, in fact, they benefit greatly from our trading relationship. And that is where, as business people, you need to get that word out yourselves through your channels, through your networks. In an organized fashion would be great, but even through provincial premiers and other channels too, to those state governors and people you mentioned, Amanda, who make a difference, because that is Trump's pressure point. They start feeling the pain, they won't be happy, and they have to know they'll feel pain. And right now, that's not what they see.
I'm going to agree with you a little bit, but I'm going to disagree with you as well. Trump needs somebody to fight with, right? So, and as for his disrespect for the head of state, he disrespects everyone, right? And there's zero chance he's giving anyone credit other than himself.
Like Georgia Maloney a lot. But.
There you go, for now, right?
For now.
But he needs a fight. And I think the example that we should take is what you're seeing out of Silicon Valley right now, right? And it's not so much take a knee or bend the knee, it's give him what he wants. What he wants is praise, what he wants is wins, right? So announce things. If you have to eat a little crow and pretend that it's, Trump's a visionary playing 4D chess and why weren't we doing this before? Because Trump has brought it to our attention. He's so brilliant. If you have to eat a little crow, right, and give him the wins, give him the wins.
Wait,
because
what wins do you want to give him?
Well, he wants us to spend more on border protection.
We've done that. We've already announced that.
Yeah, but
enough.
my point, it's never enough for Trump.
Right. So why are we negotiating with a bully? We're already
I'm not
offside.
suggesting you negotiate with a bully. I'm suggesting you give him what he wants so that he turns and pivots somewhere else. Forget about every other G7 country. Let's speak specifically about Canada. There is a housing shortage in this country. Okay? There are tons of developers across this country nothing would make them happier than to develop more housing. Single-family homes, condos, seniors housing, student housing, you name it. But there is a shortage. We have brought over 3 million people into this country in the last 3 to 5 years. But we're building on average about 200,000, 240,000 housing units across the country every year. The simple math doesn't work. And we can discuss the reasons why till we're blue in the face, but it doesn't change the fact that by 2030, we will be short 3.5 million housing units in this country. And it's only getting worse. So we can have a debate or a discussion about housing, but I don't want to hijack our panel anymore. I think we were talking about the appropriate response to Trump. So if you want to take it from there, I'm happy to rebut.
Okay, well, and I'll throw it out to, and Amanda, you can respond too. I think that the government needs to take a strong stand. Unfortunately, the government is, as we know, not completely together, but should impose tariffs preemptively because we know they're coming. And we have a list from 2018 we could pick up tomorrow. Bourbon, ketchup, mustard, you name it, orange juice, washer-dryer combinations. There's a long list of things that are pain points for America because workers who produce those goods depend on their export to Canada. And the reason those goods were selected was because they would have an effect last time. And we had tariffs for a year. If you recall, in Canada, we had tariffs on steel, aluminum, on lumber, and on that list. So that list is there. The government should make good and say, we're going to do it. And do it before Trump even comes in, and let the Americans and let him know we mean business. And if we did that, honestly, I know he's a bully, but if you hit a bully when he doesn't expect it, sometimes you get a good result. And so I think that we should stand up and defend our country and not sit here and just, say, well, we'll see what comes.
And I would say I agree with the sentiment, but at the end of the day, I'm very, very results oriented. So what do we want to do here? Do we want to win an economic war with the United States, even a short one or a small one? I would prefer not to. If my choices are broadly, preemptive economic war with the United States to show a bully that we won't be bullied, or to placate a bully and have them pivot and look somewhere else for a fight, if I can avoid the economic war and forge a deeper tie and distract an idiot and a moron and get him to focus on renaming the Gulf of Mexico. That's the approach I would take. And to your point, we've announced several things. We need to do them, right? We need to, like, we have our own issues. You were talking about us being the washing machine for drug money coming into the United States. We need to stop doing that, right? The problem in this country is that we don't lack opportunity, we don't lack resources, we don't lack, the right attitude. We lack action, right? We don't do these things. We allow others to do them. We export a ton of things to the United States. If you notice, they're all the building blocks of the economy that they have in the US. We send them, oil, gas, nickel, copper, steel. We send them precious minerals and metals. Why don't we keep them here and innovate and build things here and employ people, like to the point, the article that you sent us? Why don't we create more economic activity within this country such that wealth grows and prosperity is spread? That's what I think we need to do.
I would heartily endorse, and I think when we think about this from the point of view of businesses trying to understand their near future, which is really what the problem we have, of course, is this is all noise. But if you're running a business, as you are, you actually need to make a plan. Incidentally, as you know, CRA is implementing the capital gains inclusion increase. They did a minute it hit Ways and Means. They'll continue to do that unless and until some other government cancels it. And P.S., ask Pierre Poilievre what he thinks. He could tell you right now what to expect. He's interestingly silent on the subject of the capital gains increase. That's just an aside. I would prefer if we looked at our own economy and our own strengths and communicated to the business community the things we know. And what we know to be true is that we are free traders. So preemptively issuing tariffs or threatening them, that's not in the DNA and it's not in our self-interest. We are a nation that understands tariffs are bad for us. They may feel good, they may inflict some kind of political in the moment reaction, but they're not good for our economy and they're definitely not good for our exporting businesses. So we shouldn't do things that aren't true to our modus operandi, to our beliefs. And what are our core beliefs? What do we want? I think what good business needs is a clear message about stability, about what our path is, about what we believe. Perhaps it should be fiscal prudence. Perhaps it should be a clearer message around what we will do with trade and what we understand about what we might be doing with Europe. By the way, one of the most important things that happened when we prorogued Parliament is Bill C-282 dies as well in the Senate, which was this bill that would have made it illegal to negotiate supply management in any future trade deal. So the protecting of Quebec dairy farmers over everybody else's interests, that's gone for now. But I don't know about you, the problem, of course, is this level of uncertainty means businesses tend to sit on cash. They did it in the last Trump administration. If they do it again, we fall further behind. So to me, stability and calm is what we want to project.
I mean, we are in an era of uncertainty. There's no question about that. We've been in that era for a while, taken to another level, I guess, last few weeks, and that will be the case going forward. And uncertainty is a tax, right? There's no other way to think about uncertainty as being a tax. It forces businesses to do things differently, think about risk differently, think about opportunities differently. Do I import more stuff now in anticipation of tariffs to come? Do I look for different trading partners? Do I rethink my supply chains? Do I do that in advance? Do I wait? You're already seeing stuff like, shipping costs from Asia to the US have increased by 50% in the last month or so because businesses are trying to scramble to figure out what this all means. So all that stuff is bad for growth. The question of kind of managing it, you got to figure out what it is that he's going to do. And I don't think anybody in this room, I don't think he knows how he's going to approach it. Now, the challenge with and the opportunity of dealing with a guy like him, to Tasha's point, I don't know. Obviously he's a bully, and is it better to confront a bully and say, listen, if you do this, this is how I'm going to respond? And does he view that threat as a credible deterrent to not do that, or does he take it as a challenge? And say, oh yeah, you're going to do that? Well, I've got the bigger stick. I can do way more to you than to me. I honestly, I don't know what the right way is. I do think it's important for us to signal that we will retaliate in kind if they do things, because the U.S. business community is our greatest partner on all this stuff. I mean, we can talk all we've gone about how our interests are better served by the same trade policy in the U.S. But at the end of the day, U.S. businesses are the ones that are going to be putting pressure on Trump to do something or not. And they have a tremendous amount to lose if we go down the path that Trump is suggesting we go down.
Well, and leadership is really going to be key here. You've all sort of highlighted that. So I'd like to turn it back a little bit to what's going on in Canada. In the polls, it seemed to indicate that Canadians had decided Trudeau did not know what he was doing with the economy. But to Amanda's point, do people think Pierre Poilievre does?
I would say that Poilievre's plans for the economy have been very simplistically presented because that's been his role as an opposition leader. He is not putting out grand plans. He has put out certain measures on housing, for example. We know he would axe the tax on the carbon tax, so get rid of it, presumably. But he hasn't really fleshed out a very large plan, and I think in part is also because things are moving so quickly, and your plan one moment might not be the plan the next. So from the Conservatives' political perspective, they've played it smart because people have been so fixated on this current government and its failings and the impact of their immigration policy on housing, the impact of inflation on their bottom line at the grocery store. So the Conservatives have had, I would say, a bit of a pass on presenting specifics for their economic plan, but we know that they say they will do things differently, and they've promised fiscal prudence as well. So I think people are attracted by the promise of change. And so Poilievre's promise doesn't have to be that granular. And so that's why there's such a gap between the two parties. It will be interesting to see as a Liberal leadership unfolds if that gap starts to narrow. And we don't know that right now, but it could narrow somewhat. I don't think it will completely disappear.
I think one of the advantages of being in a political transition is that a new Liberal leader in an election campaign will force the Conservatives to have a bit more clarity as to what it is, how they want to take the country forward. Even on the question of fiscal solvency, it's not clear to me that under Conservative government we're going to have fiscal policy that is geared very differently than where it is now. Right? You've got a government that wants to cut taxes, great. You've got a government that wants to cut the GST on homes, which is $6 billion a year. You've got a government that wants to raise spending on defense. You have, it's not clear where you find expenditure cuts to offset all that stuff. So, and then you think about the competitive dimension with the U.S. Well, if the Americans don't give a damn about their deficit, it's like 7% of GDP, and we care about ours, it's not even 1.5. Does that change your perspective on what it is you want to achieve on the fiscal side? You say, listen, for a couple of years, I'm going to make these big investments in Canada. I'm going to cut taxes. I'm going to, I guess we're not going to do corporate welfare anymore, but find some ways to turbocharge the economy with the fiscal tools at our disposal. So at least you're minimizing the trauma that comes out of the U.S. from a competitive perspective, from a regulatory perspective, from a tax perspective. So I don't actually think that the fiscal kind of prudence is going to be the right thing for the next couple of years, just given what we're dealing with down south and given what they need to do on the fiscal side to make things better.
And you talked about how the change up of the Liberals is really going to sort of push the Conservatives. I'm going to put you all on the spot and ask for a prediction because it's going to matter. Who do you think is going to be the next Liberal leader?
Not Justin Trudeau.
All right.
Not acceptable, Amanda. You've got to go deeper than that.
Yeah, not Dominic LeBlanc.
Yeah.
There, I'll say that one.
Not Dennis Mitchell.
You never know. You never know.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, the panel takes itself out of the equation. I think that we know who the contenders are. If I had to pick a dark horse candidate or outside candidate from the party itself, I would say Christy Clark would be a very interesting candidate because she brings both political and non-political experience to the table. That's Mark Carney's Achilles heel, is that he doesn't have any political experience if we were to run. But to predict who would win this contest from within cabinet, I would say that François-Philippe Champagne has a good chance, but I wouldn't bet money on anyone right now because they have an open leadership process, and that's the biggest problem. Anyone can join who's 14 years old and ordinarily resident in Canada. And if that scares you, it should, because this opens their race up to foreign interference, to special interests, to mischief makers. Bodie McBoatface could win this contest. I don't know. They need to get a handle on that as a party. Otherwise, you can't really predict anything, in my opinion.
I mean, I think one thing we could somewhat comfortably predict is that whomever is leader of the Liberal Party will not be the next prime minister, which of course limits the interest of some candidates in this race. So the question is who wants to run and lose, and that narrows the field markedly.
Yeah, but I agreed with that actually. We had this debate in the shop as to why Mark Carney would want to step in now. But the thing about it is that you run for the job when the job's available, right? So whoever the next Liberal leader is, technically they'll be the next Prime Minister actually. They're going to lose the next, briefly. They're going to lose the next election, but they will still be the Liberal leader, which means come the next election, in all likelihood, they will be the standard bearer. So for people like Carney or Bayliss or anybody else outside of the party now who wants to run for the leadership and become Prime Minister, this is the time that they have to run and get involved. So quite frankly, I think it's either somebody from the existing apparatus, right, or somebody from outside. The leading contender from outside, I think, my personal opinion is probably Carney, right? And the leading contender from inside right now, I think, is Chrystia Freeland. She's got the biggest name recognition. She dropped a bomb and started this whole thing. But I mean, that's where we are on January 8th, right? Anything could happen between now and when they actually cast votes. So we'll see.
To me, the more interesting question is, what kind of leader do the Liberals want? So if you think about the challenges we've got in the country, housing, social issues, a broad range of things that make life less appealing than otherwise could be the case here, they're all fundamentally economic in nature. So you can kind of trace it all back to our inability to produce and our ability to innovate, to be productive, to a range of things. And I think if the Liberal Party were to recognize that by putting in place somebody that has a compelling economic vision, like that's, I mean, I guess I'm saying Carney here to some extent, but somebody who is, listen, I get what's wrong with this country from an economic perspective, and this is what I think we need to do to fix it. It gives them more of a chance. I don't think they're going to win, but it allows for a rebrand of the party and a party that stands for, that will have done a bit of introspection and understood that there are some issues that they've mismanaged from an economic perspective that have come home to roost, and we're serious about fixing those. That to me is, is that Freeland, is that Carney, is that somebody else? Maybe Carney or Freeland, but that to me is the really important thing. Just, are they going to pick somebody whose vision is going to be compelling for how the economy works going forward, or a political operative?
And I think, to the point Tasha made, if there's a continuum through politics globally, it's a disaffection by populations with the status quo. And so we've seen incumbents removed because change feels like a relief, even though, of course, sometimes it's change for the worse, or arguably so. In this case, maybe an outsider, therefore, has the best shot at offering a change to the population. I'll say what I've said before, and I'll say it till I die, I hope, which is, unlike in other countries, we don't really have to worry about whom our next prime minister is. We have a robust, stable system. Our parties are reasonably closely aligned under a pretty big tent. I have nothing to fear, I don't think, from anybody of any stripe. I'm more afraid to hear JF say that we should go back to prolific spending, but that's gonna stay with me a little bit.
Okay, I'm gonna disagree. I don't think it's fear is the word, but I think prime ministers can do a lot of damage, and I think that the biggest damage this government has done has flowed through their mismanagement of the immigration system, because it has provoked a series of crises and also a loss of confidence in the government. It's given a raw deal to newcomers, blackened our image around the world because people come here and what they were told isn't true, and they're living, 9 people in a basement in Brampton, and they don't have the life they thought they'd have. And meanwhile, people can't find places to live, and they come and they protest you, Dennis, and this is, No, but it's true. This is, the root of this was the desire of this government to compensate for the labor disruptions during COVID by allowing too many people in. And I hate to say it, business wanted people to come in. Understandably, you needed people to staff your businesses, in particular hospitality sector and others where people just didn't come back. But the government's response was a huge overreaction, and that's provoked a backlash, and here we are. So I do fear some prime ministers who, maybe good intentions or political intentions, you can read into it what you want, but who do things that do inexorably change a country for the worse. And I think this government has done that on that front.
Slightly incrementally, but not in any material way. And we can argue, we shouldn't do it here, but we could argue, and reasonable people can argue, that where the policy on immigration went wrong was in not believing in it long enough. In other words, it was a vision that I think went way beyond labor force requirements about growing the population of this country and dealing with the demographic issue that we have faced for decades and continue to face. Remember the whole population of 100 million goal.
Yeah,
it only works if you believe in it. It only works if you stick with it. Because the first part of the process of immigration is the ugliest. It's the part where people need to extract from the economy, but they're not yet giving back. And what we do know about immigration is that immigrants give back in spades, economically,
Amanda,
innovation, culturally. And this government lost its nerve. I get it. I get
it's
why.
It's not about losing its nerve.
It feels like that.
The people who came in here are the immigrants. The people who came in here are suffering because of this. People are suffering.
I would wager that everybody who walked into this room was a second or third generation Canadian. I don't have any reason to think those were new.
It's easy for us to say in this room. My parents were immigrants to this country, came here with absolutely nothing. $2 my father had in his pocket when he came here, and worked their tails off to have a life. But they could do it because the circumstances were such that they could get the jobs, and they could. People are not. I live next to St. Jamestown in Cabbagetown, and I see people there, and the misery is real. We don't see it here. And of 100 million people in this country, there are other solutions like productivity. We need to be more productive. You need fewer workers if they're more productive. You have more automation, you need fewer workers. Other countries are looking at solutions. Japan has a far worse demographic situation than ours. They're looking at all sorts of different things, but mass immigration is not on the table because they know they can't handle it. So
this is the heart of the debate. Again, this isn't the debate we should have here. The debate is whether they were on the right track or not.
Barbara's winking at me. I'm going to stop.
All I'm saying is if you believe that they were on the right track, stopping midway was their mistake. They should have actually doubled down and said, we believe in this and we're going to keep it going.
They haven't stopped. Right, the announcement in October reduced the amount.
Tell international students if they've stopped.
Pulled back the family
more than
too.
Stopped.
I think. Sorry, just one second.
Yeah, please.
I think the immigration issue. Now you can argue about what the right number is, and it was probably too fast for our economy to accommodate. But I think what it really laid bare, which is the fundamental challenge in our country, is that when you bring in a whole lot of people, so you increase the human capital in an economy. Ideally, you want to raise physical capital at the same time, right? So you're bringing in workers and you're bringing in a lot of capital, and so your capital labor ratio doesn't change or it improves. And we know in Canada, that historically we're just not good at investing. Like our investment rates are really, really low. So we went into an immigration process where we basically said we can bring in as many people as businesses want, and they did that, largely the wage workers. When we knew, or we should have known, that businesses weren't going to respond by raising investment to a very significant degree, where we knew that the housing system wasn't going to be able to generate the homes that we needed for all those folks, because that hasn't been the case ever in Canada. So the question to me is less, obviously we're going to reduce immigration, but it's more a question of what do we need to change within Canada so that we can bring in, maybe not 1 million a year, but a lot of folks a year, so that we prosper to a degree that other countries can't. Because the reality is, what we've seen on the demographic side here is a game changer compared to other countries. Now, there's a downside, I totally understand. But I think that downside flows from the fact that we, that immigration flow, that population flow kind of exposed, reminded us of a key weakness in Canada, which is that we don't invest enough. And our businesses don't invest enough. There's a million reasons for that. So you had this intersection, and it just led to the challenges that we're dealing with now.
And I'm going to stay with you because we have a reader question about investments in Canada. And the question is, why are they stagnating compared to Mexico and the United States? And what are ways for businesses and organizations to maybe increase investment?
Well, quite honestly, and right now, it's tough to encourage businesses to do that, right? Because you've got this uncertainty with Trump. You're not quite sure what the climate's going to be the next year or so. Am I going to go under or not? Am I going to have access to this market or not? So there's this kind of cyclical, temporary dimension. The rest of it is, the challenge on the investment side is we don't really know why Canadian firms invest less than other firms. We know, for instance, that large Canadian firms invest much like international competitors. Maybe a little less R&D, but they're just as competitive as our international competitors. So the issue is not there. The issue is with small and medium-sized enterprises, and why are they investing less than their compatriots, or I guess their competitors in other countries? I don't think anybody's got a really good answer for that. There's all kinds of, you can say it's taxes, it's regulations, all kinds of things, and there's no doubt some of that in there, but it's also culture, it's also interprovincial trade barriers, it's also kind of the culture of the country where, we aren't, savage on the competition side. We are okay with small companies, and we're okay with, paying more for the price of milk, and we're okay for paying more for cars than in the U.S. just because we're much more complacent. So it's all these things that work to hinder us. Now, historically, of course, when you look at investment movements in Canada, they've been in the energy sector, and that has not been the reality for the last almost 8 or 9 years now. And that's actually one of the things that the Conservatives can turn around pretty quickly, right? And so there is, I am actually optimistic in the next government, we are probably going to see a fairly significant increase in productivity, just because we're going to have a different perspective on investment in the energy space or the extractive side. And that draws in huge amounts of capital really quickly. They're high-paying jobs. It's hugely capital-intensive. So we're probably going to get a spike in investment. Now, that's not tech stuff. It's not AI. It's not biotechnology. It's not necessarily the cutting-edge stuff that we compete against in the global world. But we know how to get money in here quickly if we need to, and that's in the energy space.
It's not necessarily going to improve the lives of ordinary Canadians either.
No.
It's one of those data points. Productivity is a funny data point, as you know. Because so you brought it up twice. I wasn't going to bring it up, but there was a really good Bank of Canada study in December that's worth a read, looking at the productivity gap between Canada and the US and the GDP per capita gap. And the vast majority of that gap is thanks to the top 10% of income earners in this country. In other words, if you take out, and this is pre-tax, so it's nothing to do with taxation, if you take out the top 10% wealthiest Canadians, we don't really have a productivity gap. It hasn't worsened in the last 2 decades. So let that sink in for a second, because we talk a lot about this as though workers aren't working hard enough.
That was the income gap.
Yes, well, just the top 10% income is attributable for the vast majority of the productivity and GDP per capita gap. And the reason they posit, this is one study, there have been others, they posit that it's because we lose high-performing Canadians to the US. It's a small number, but it's statistically relevant because those high performers are statistically more innovative. They start companies, they grow them. And so we're losing all the external benefits, the externalities from these people who leave. And then you say, well, how do we solve that problem? It's a cultural piece. It's not one single policy. It's how we all think about business and making money and celebrating our businesses. And I hope that changes with the new government, but I haven't heard that messaging from it. I haven't heard pro-business messaging from any political leadership in this country in a long time. And that's part of the issue here, is we have a culture that's counter to business.
Yeah, and I would say, to follow on to your earlier question, who the Liberals are going to pick, they're going to pick who they think can win, right? I don't think they looked at Trudeau, 10 years ago and said, here's a guy with a clear vision who's going to take Canada to the next level. They said, here's a guy with a name that everybody recognizes. He's young, good looking. We're going to rally behind this guy and we're going to win. I think that was the substance of the analysis. It would be fantastic if we had political leadership that actually had a plan, right? And the immigration strategy is a perfect example of that. The Privy Council actually went to Trudeau and Freeland and pointed out that this is going to create a housing shortage, along with other externalities, if you proceed. And they just proceeded, because they didn't have a plan. So it would be fantastic if we had political leadership in this country that basically said, here is our collective vision for what this country could be 10 years from now. Here are the building blocks we're going to put in place to allow that to happen. And a lot of that is going to be focusing on less giving stuff to all of us. I don't need a $250 check, right? I know the average Canadian, that gets them 1 month ahead on their bills, but I personally don't need a $250 check from the government. What I would prefer is for the government to find ways for companies to employ more people in more productive activity so that we create more prosperity that can be kept by our citizens. I would love for political leadership in this country to have some sort of long-term plan. I mean, and it would be great if it was the Liberals, because with the exception of Dion and Ignatieff, if you're the Liberal leader, you're eventually going to become the Prime Minister of Canada by default, right? So it'd be great if the Liberals actually came up with a comprehensive solution that created prosperity in this country. Absent that, we are what we are, right? We provide raw materials to other people to make good stuff.
So one reflection on that is, I think a huge issue that we have in Canada is lack of accountability on the political side. And that accountability flows from us not voting to get people out who do silly things. Right? So you look at health outcomes across the country, they're horrible. And you get governments who decide, okay, well, we're going to give people checks for this and then go to the federal government right after and say, we need a couple $2 billion because we don't have enough nurses or hospitals, those kinds of things. So ideally, when you pick a new leader, when you have a platform, and we wrote something about this with Robert Asselin, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, you know, you try to put in some kind of accountability mechanism in your platform. Say, you know, our plan is, for instance, to raise GDP per capita by 2% a year, or some number, or productivity by X number of years, so that every year as you progress through the political cycle, you're reminded of this commitment that you've made and that you're failing or exceeding it. Because absent that, you know, Canadians are not good at holding politicians to account. We're just not. Right?
Most Canadians wouldn't understand, though. This is the
Why
problem.
no?
Set
But
those goals and the 2% GDP, or you know, we want this benchmark interest rate to be X, and I mean, government doesn't even control that.
They wouldn't understand it, but they would feel the consequences, right? They would live it.
But they wouldn't make the direct link.
Yeah, they wouldn't make a link, and I don't think the problem is events which happen and which then force you to respond and take you off your track. So you can have a nice plan for raising GDP, and then you have a natural disaster,
COVID,
or you have COVID, or you have other things that come along, a war, whatever. I think the government's going to have to respond to create investment. To your point, what can they do? They're going to have to match what happens down south. So taxes are going to have to go down. That's a big one, because Trump is going to drop taxes across the board, which is one of the reasons he wants our tariffs, by the way, is to compensate for the amount of money that he won't take in there. And deregulation is another one. You know, we have a lot of regulation in this country, especially in the environmental space. I know the Conservatives have made noises on that point, and I think they're right. That is a big stopping point for a lot of investors who just go, no, what? Why? Why would I go there? And to the point of the brain drain, we should talk to those people. You're absolutely right, Amanda. Why do we lose our most talented people? Is it the money?
That's easy. It's
okay.
The money.
It's the money. Well, then, what is it? The money just on their personal tax bill, or is it the money accessible to them that's brought in as capital that they can tap to grow their business? So there's a lot. I agree with you, but those folks should be the ones that are consulted as to why. You should have exit interviews when you leave the country. If you're one of those top 10%, exit. Why are you going? And take it down.
I mean, really. So on that, like, you know, the reality is, if you're in a reasonably high wage industry, like probably most of you in the room, in the tech space, American salaries are 50 to 80% higher than they are in Canada, than they are in the US, they are in France and Germany and Italy and all over the world.
And at the very top, it's X times.
Oh yeah, multiple times. And of course, you've got a lower tax rate on top of that. So the power of compensation is a driver, and that's the point of the Bank of Canada study. The power of compensation to attract the best and the brightest is truly compelling. Now, you've got to have businesses that are able to pay those salaries, and I would argue that we can't, because that's where they are. The American firms can, for a whole range of reasons: access to financing, more opportunities, you know, venture capital markets that reward performance far more than ours. So there's a lot more money to share with workers. But ultimately, that's one of the huge things. You know, American highly skilled work in certain fields earn multiples of what is earned elsewhere in the world, and that's always going to draw people there, no matter what we do here.
But it's not even the person who wins who gets the brass ring. It's not even the person who becomes the next CEO of JP Morgan. It's 500 people brought into JP Morgan who are all clawing and fighting and competing for that job. And all of them, it whittles down. The 500 become 100, become 20, become 10, become 5, become 2, right? But along the way, that pyramid, they're all innovating and creating stuff. This guy opens up the Asian market. This woman creates the derivatives business. And all of that prosperity accrues to everybody who works at that firm in some form or another. And then eventually one woman gets to the top. And the rewards there are astronomical, right? Like, not only are you making, Jamie Dimon made $36 million last year, which doesn't sound like a lot until, the highest paid bank CEO in Canada made, I think, 11 or 17, something like that. But it's the equity that compounds and compounds until Jamie Dimon's a billionaire, right? The reward is enormous and incents hundreds, if not thousands of people to compete for that. And that spreads to other people, right? We don't have those systems here in Canada because, we have a cozy network of 6 really large banks. Sorry, JF.
I agree.
I talked to a retail REIT CEO years ago, and he said, look, the Canadian market will support 1.5 large competitors across every industry, right? Whether it's groceries or book retailing or take your pick, we support 1.5 large competitors, and you can see that. And so there isn't the same competitive tension. And again, the rewards south of the border are so much bigger that that's where that top 1% goes.
I'm sorry. I know Amanda's
Can I
dying
just
to
add
say
like
something
one
here.
tiny little Pollyanna note, which is there are more reasons to live in a country than the top paid
Oh,
job pays.
100%.
And there's a lot of reasons why the talented people in this room choose Canada, and we should all remember it and remind our peers, and that's why we're here. There's a lot that goes on in a country that matters.
Sorry. Thanks, Amanda. I actually had the 5-minute warning, and we've sort of blown right through it, so
Yep.
somebody's going to come hook me in a minute. But I just wanted to say there was a request from the audience for a bit more economics, and that was in my cards. We didn't get there. So I'm going to start with you. Interest rates, dollar. Quick.
Interest rates, we think the Bank of Canada is almost done. Maybe another 25 basis points, possibly 50. Inflation is coming up a little bit in Canada. We're a little bit comfortable with that. Wage growth is still pretty strong. The rate-sensitive parts of the economy, we've talked about all this negative stuff, but the rate-sensitive parts of the economy have actually turned around pretty significantly the last several months. So monetary policy is having traction. That being said, the Canadian dollar is in a horrible spot, and it will be in a horrible spot for the foreseeable future, not because of Canada stuff, but because of what's going on down south, either because of the risk that it creates, safe haven flows, folks want US dollars, or because the Fed will stop cutting around 4 or maybe even higher than that. And of course, if you're talking about tariffs in the US, which we've talked a lot about, one of the consequences of tariff policy is that exchange rates respond to that. So the Americans put tariffs 25% on our stuff, or Europeans, like forget it. So we've got a view the Canadian dollar goes to 145. We've had that for a few months now. It's working out remarkably well in the foreign exchange space, which is nice for a change, even though it's going in a bad direction. And our question is not, are we more likely to be 140 versus 145 this time next year? Are we more likely to be 145 or 150 or 155?
And
Because you're hostage to these factors these forces that really tilt the balance of risks for the Canadian dollar towards the downside as opposed to the upside. And other currencies as well. We're not again, this is not a Canada-specific issue. This is everybody against the US, largely everybody.
Well, you had talked about earlier that the dollar, the impact of Trump is not baked in. It's maybe what's going to happen with Trump, not the actual.
Yeah, so you've priced in some risk related to that, but you assume rationality, right? You assume, okay, he's not going to do 25% tariffs. So you don't,
Thanks, JF.
so we assume that for now. It's subject to deception or. So you're not planning, you don't have the worst case outcomes built into your forecast, but it is clear that the more he talks about tariffs, the more he articulates his vision for how he wants the U.S. to play a role in the world, the more that's threatening from a currency perspective.
So it could get worse.
But let's also agree that the currency, just like the trade deficit, it should not be oversimplified, and that we've lived with a weak currency most of our history. But the norm is in the low 70s, so I think we can chill out a little bit.
Yep.
155 is terrible, so I hope you're wrong about that. But
I hope so too.
yeah.
That's not our forecast, but just thinking about the risk. And of course, one of the huge challenges with a weaker currency in an environment where we're talking about capital spending and investment is, we import almost all our capital goods. So if you're trying to counter the U.S. tensions by investing more in Canada, getting our businesses to ramp up spending and capital expenditures, well, if the dollar's at 145 or 150 versus 120, that's a huge increase in the cost of capital.
Which makes it difficult to invest.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Wrap up thoughts from the last.
So I disagree. I think that GDP is tracking around 1%. I think the Bank of Canada is going to have to cut 2 to 4 more times this year, if not more. Unemployment is ticking up. Business investment has been anemic, so the outlook for growth and GDP growth is weak as well. And then you've got waves and waves of mortgage renewals at rates that are half of where the posted rates are today. So I think the Bank of Canada is going to have to cut more. I do think CAD is in jeopardy of depreciating a little bit more versus USD. And I hope our next Prime Minister has a plan to actually create some economic prosperity here. So we'll see.
I think he's going to bring in tariffs, and our GDP will drop about 2 to 4%. We'll be in a recession within a couple of quarters, and I think the dollar will be probably 150, maybe 155. And they'll have to cut interest rates too. Sorry.
That's great. I haven't been hooked yet, but I'm looking for it. So I think we should wrap it up. I want to thank the panelists. This was wonderful.
I want to go on record
really
as saying I disagree with her too.
There we go.
Leave it at that.
You'd agree to disagree.
Maybe meet here next time, this time next year.
Very nice to meet you. As always.
JF, Tasha, Amanda, and Dennis, especially you, Dennis, on behalf of Canadian Club Toronto, we appreciate your very robust engagement on these challenging issues. I know everyone is now so excited to get back to work on the basis of what we've just heard. But I must say, one of the gifts of being the president of the Canadian Club of Toronto is that I think it makes certainly me, and I'm sure many presidents before me, very proud to be Canadian. So although we did talk about this as being a perilous moment, you did give us some reason for optimism. So what I captured here, some of them are interesting. Proroguing Parliament protects against overreaction, so maybe it was a good thing. I think that's one for all of us to contemplate. Trudeau out is a win for Trump. That was also another interesting one. I think we had an over and under on tariffs. Should we be proactive or not? That was a good debate, and that's one I'm sure that we will continue to debate over the coming weeks and months. We need to turbocharge the Canadian economy to build productivity and prosperity here. Very, very true. How we do it with a dollar that is devaluing, that's challenging, but I think we all agree that we need to invest in this country for the people that live here. The country needs clarity, stability, so that business doesn't stay on the sidelines, and we need political leaders with a plan. So very well said, and I think that was said by a number of you in a number of different ways, but we absolutely need that because we have great things here to celebrate and protect and to build upon, and we all actually have an opportunity to do that and be a part of that. Change will clearly be the constant. We will wait with anticipation and maybe some fear for the diplomatic and economic moves to play out over the months to come. But your insights were really appreciated. And of course, Barbara, thank you so much for moderating this very dynamic panel. Just a few closing notes before I let you go, so that you're aware we've got some interesting events coming up. So on Tuesday, January 14th, the Honourable François-Philippe Champagne, Federal Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, and perhaps the next leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, will be at our podium, so you may want to hear what he has to say. On January 21st, we'll host a panel of experts to discuss medical misinformation in Canada, so come and join us to hear from Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Theresa Tam and President of the Canadian Medical Association, Dr. Joss Reimer. And then you might also be particularly interested to hear more of what we might expect moving forward from former Governor of the Bank of Canada, Stephen Poloz, when he joins us for lunch on February 5th. Be sure to visit our website for details. As always, I would like to thank our AV supplier, VBC Live, for their ongoing support of our events. Thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon. Have a great day.